Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Happy to present this interesting perspective on astrology of relationships, obviously from an evolutionary point of view. And thank you, Linda, for inviting me. This will also be available on YouTube, I believe, on your channel. So those of you who come in late, you can catch up later. So relationships are such an important topic because it is where the work is. At least a big portion of our development is through interaction and relationship with other people, whether that is romantic or professional or just parent-child dynamics. Everything about relationship, we can see the different types of relationships in the chart. Relationship with our parents, relationship with our siblings, lovers, etc. Every part of the wheel represents a different aspect of that. And one of the one of the important aspect of relationships is that it it takes us outside our comfort zone, where we have to face our insecurities. We have to face a side of ourselves that we may not be aware of when we are on our own. And life is really very complex in that sense because, on the one hand, we are wired to yearn for relationship, to want to connect, because there's a part of us that wants to reconnect to the source, that wants to reconnect to our ultimate identity. And relationship are like the pathway to open ourselves to a greater energy that takes us beyond the ego, that takes us beyond our own perceptions. So it's like a bridge from the self to the greater whole. But at the same time, life also pressures us to build a defense mechanism. We lose our innocence early on as as we face challenges, as nature includes a predator and prey interrelationship that force every species, whether it's a carnivore or whether it's a herbivore, to develop defense mechanism. Even plants have defense mechanism. They have poison, they have thorns. Um, we are constantly challenged to be able to stand on our own. And we see that in astrology very clearly in the Aries Libra polarity. So the Aries polarity is about how we make it on our own in this life, how we developed our muscle tone, our strength, our whether it's physical or mental strength, and how we are able to overcome daily challenges. From an Aries point of view, from a Mars point of view, every day is a victory. Every day that we make it is a victory to celebrate. So the Aries dynamic prompts us to be self-reliant and not trust people so easily, to be able to really manage to develop ourselves. And then the Libra polarity exposes us to that feeling of lack, that it doesn't matter how autonomous we are and how skilled we are and how powerful we may be, there are some things that we cannot do on our own. To begin with, um, to have a child, we need a partner. Even if you get a sperm donor, even if you get an egg donor, it's still coming from somebody else's body. So the Libra principle represents the fact that the way creation has manifested is that we can be whole and we can be powerful on our own, but we will reach the limitations of our separation, of our sense of self. So we live in this duality, which is also an Aries Libra axis, the axis of duality. And we live in this duality where, on the one hand, we are prompted, and I'm not saying this is a choice, it's it's a challenge. We are prompted to develop our defenses and to develop our capacity. And then we are also prompted to reach out and to take the risk of engaging with other people, whether that is emotional, sexual, intellectual. An interaction with other people can enrich us on many different levels. But it is, the risk of trusting and the risk of including people in our comfort zone. Now, that's where the square to Cancer comes in, our security, our intimacy. So when we are able to find the balance between the Aries Libra polarity, it immediately involves a risk to that Cancer fourth house corner of the zodiac, where we are fragile, where we are vulnerable, and where we need support. So, we're going to explore in this talk the different types of relationships. And from an evolutionary point of view, we always want to understand not just, if Libras get along with Geminis. We look at the chart to understand why people come together. What is the evolutionary reason? Even though we know that, all of us at one point in our life will be challenged to form relationships. So it's in our charts. We all have a seventh house. Um, there are different types of interaction, different layers of interaction, which we will examine in the short time that we have in this session. And so I would also like to invite you, if you resonate with this approach and this material, I am teaching a comprehensive diploma program in evolutionary astrology. So it's about a 2-year program that includes everything, chart analysis, evolutionary intentions, understanding the soul journey, but also understanding vocational orientation, relationships, locational astrology. So we're looking at a really very rich program that starts from the very beginning to advanced levels. And people who join this program are often intermediate astrologers. They already have some background. But if you are new to astrology, it can also, there's no problem. So most of the program is now online, thanks to COVID. Um, and so, from wherever you are on the globe, and you can study at your own pace. So for more information, my website, mauricefernandez.com. So when we look at the wheel and we want to understand the different aspects of relationship, we know the seventh house is the typical reference, as well as the eighth house. But really, every house and every sign serves, contributes to the cause of relationship. Even the first house, where we speak about autonomy and we speak about standing up for ourselves and really being able to fend for ourselves, there is a sexual quality to the first house. It's Martian, it's instinctual. And even though it is survival oriented, the Aries Mars principle has to do with forming relationships in order to strengthen our genes and the lineage. So, wherever we have our Mars in the chart, and whatever sign is in the first house, is going to represent how do we interpret strength? And what type of genes do we look for in a partner? What I mean by that is, from a Mars point of view, I'm going to connect to someone who can make me stronger and can make my children stronger, which means someone that I will mate with that can have strong genes that I will be able to, strengthen my line and have healthy children. So there's something very primal, even unconscious. We're not necessarily thinking in those terms. When we are attracted to someone, it happens on a more subliminal level. We don't always know why we're attracted to a person and not another. But that Mars factor will determine what is it that makes us blush, that makes us suddenly excited and and want to basically connect with a person. So for example, if you have Mars in Taurus, you will interpret strength very physically. So it may have to do with an attraction to people who have a strong body, people who are resilient physically, who are going to be uh, into constructions or gym bunnies, people who look also beautiful and strong. The other thing about Mars in Taurus is financial security. So there can be an instinctive need to find someone who is able to sustain themselves financially, practically, and maybe not just sustain themselves, but accumulate wealth. So someone wealthy will be interpreted as someone who, has strong cards, someone who has strong genes. Comparing that to someone with Mars in Aquarius, their interpretation of strong genes will be more mental. So they're going to look for people who are, computer geniuses, people who can solve problems quickly. And the attraction will be to that, strong mental capacity and ability to, to think ahead of the curve and to be able to solve problems and to innovate. So your Mars, on the one hand is your survival instinct and your ability to fight any kind of offender and oppressor and stand up for your rights, but it's also that attraction, like I say, a very primal attraction, physical attraction, and sexual attraction to those who, you will find powerful, strong, and that's a currency that you're yearning for. Like you want that for yourself. And that's also important to understand that, when we form relationship, there's obviously an exchange of energy. So we speak about giving and receiving. um, so from a Mars point of view, if we want more strength, that's also something we can gain from our partners. And that's why, the eighth house is also, and Pluto and Scorpio, also the higher octave of Mars. So that's where the transformation occurs when we connect with other people. There's an exchange of resources. And so the next house is going to be the second house and Taurus and Venus. And that relates to our assets. In a very basic way, in traditional way, this Taurus represents our land, our physical body, the physical dimension. This is where the spirit gets into matter, into flesh. So through Taurus, we see not who we are, but what we have. And if I speak about land, from a survival point of view, land is about what you can grow. It has to do with food. And Taurus relates to agriculture as well as possessions, as well as, physical well-being and you know, beauty. What is beauty but an embodiment of spirit into matter? When something is beautiful, it has spirit. It's not just physical. You recognize uh, a deeper quality to it. So the second house in Taurus represents what you have. And if you have certain assets, what what is it? How does it feed you? How do you manage to sustain yourself with that? If you have a piece of land, what can you grow on that land that will feed you and your family? Now, if you can grow tomatoes or cucumbers on your land, you will you have enough space to also grow other vegetables or farm animals? So what happens with the Taurus side is that you develop your currency, your worth, because whatever you manage to grow, whatever you manage to develop, whatever your assets are, and these can be material assets as well as psychological assets or intellectual assets. The second house is what you have. And whatever sign is on the second house will determine how your self worth is measured. For example, if I have Leo in the second house, what I have is creativity. What I have is, ambition and a strong will. That is part of my currency. And how will I measure my worth? How do I feel worthy with Leo in the second house? I feel worthy if I create things, if I have a purpose in life. So it's that ability to make things happen, to manifest your life, and to feel that you're doing something meaningful, Leo. So people who have Leo in the second house and don't do much and don't create anything will have a very low self-esteem, and vice versa. If you have Sagittarius in the second house, your self-worth will be measured according to your knowledge and wisdom and capacity to, you know, conceptualize existence. And that's your currency. That's what you're going to sell. That's what grows on your land and what you will be able to trade um, as you enter relationships. So you see in this chart, naturally, Venus rules two signs, Taurus and Libra. And so the second house is what you have, and it's your relationship with yourself and your self worth. And the seventh house is what you don't have, is what you're lacking. The seventh house sign is usually the sign where you are the weakest, where you don't want to be bothered. And you prefer that someone else takes care of it. So if I have Cancer in the seventh house, I don't want to deal with this emotional stuff. I'd rather have someone else do it for me. I'd rather have someone take care of the domestic duties. Um, I'd rather have someone else do the mothering. If I have Leo in the seventh house, I'd rather have someone else take charge and someone else take the stage and step on, be in the limelight. I'd rather be more private. I'm not comfortable, taking a very visible role. So the seventh house is what, you want other people to do. And why will they do that for you? Because you're going to trade what you have in your second house. So what you have, second house, will compare to what other people have and offer you in the seventh house. And so there's a natural tension in a quincunx between the seven and the second, and both Venus ruled. But think about it as currency. Now, if you have low self-esteem in your second house, you're not going to have a very good deal in the seventh. Because if your self-worth is not so high, what happens is that you will receive very little and you will have to give a lot to receive little. It's basically the strength of your currency. If your currency is devalued, you have to give a lot of money to receive just a few dollars back. The second house and the first house are also very sexual houses because they have to do with that primal instinct to be in your body, to empower yourself, and to develop your capacity. And we'll talk about sexuality in a future slide. The third house, in a very classical way, has to do with siblings. And why siblings? And also, when we speak about siblings, it also includes cousins and uncles and the extended family. So basically, the third house has to do with your environment, those that are with you on that level. And think about your siblings, they share the same family, they share the same parents. Excuse me, allergies. All right. So the third house has to do with how you get along with people around you in order to find your way, how you communicate. So it's more mental, it's not as emotional, but it's a necessary relationship in order for you to navigate existence. Fourth house is family and your support system. It's the place where you are able to be vulnerable because that's where you're not alone. It's one of the most sacred place, I would say, in the zodiac because it's probably one of the only places in the zodiac where you can really be yourself and let your defenses down. Just like, being a child in under the care of your parents. You are authentic. You are real, and that's where the love is really very strong. Hopefully, if it manifests in a positive way, because obviously, because you're so vulnerable, it's also a place where you can get hurt. So the fourth house relates to your ability to actually connect emotionally with people, to feel that out of the whole crowd, there's one person that makes you feel safe, that you can resonate with, that you can feel close to, and you can let your defenses down. Then the fifth house is also a fixed house, and it's also a very sexual house. And that's why the fifth house relates to children and to our creativity. So, creativity in an entrepreneurial way, creating a business, leading. It has to do with creativity on a artistic level, but also creativity on a biological level. And we know, Leo has to do with the orgasmic power of creation and the ability to basically uh, bring life through relationships. The sixth house has to do with functional relationships, professional relationships, how we get along with our colleagues, how we, work together to create a Zoom meeting and have a good a good presentation. So it has to do with the more logistical and more professional interaction. And we talked about the seventh house, how critical it is and central to relationships. Then the eighth house is obviously where the relationship, is leading to a fusion. So where two people become one. And it's interesting. In the fifth house is where two people become three, but in the eighth house is two people becoming one. And really, where you choose your partner and you are able to include them in that intimate space as a water house and fuse with them. Now, this is why the eighth house is also a house where there's so much trauma and so much wounding, because this is where you open up to people who are initially strangers. The difference between the vulnerability of the fourth house and the vulnerability of the eighth house, that in the fourth house, you're vulnerable among yours. You're with your family and your parents. But in the eighth house, you're vulnerable with strangers, or at least people who were initially strangers. They didn't grow up with you. So these are your partners that you will learn to trust over time. This is why the risk of being betrayed and having violations of trust or facing rejection or being abused is tremendous. And, you know, that's the Mars Pluto interplay. So the eighth house is a house where there's so much gain and so much depth, and we can go as deep as possible and transform ourselves to a higher version of ourselves. But it's also where we could, be very wounded. The ninth house is a house where the relationships become more transpersonal. It's we start to move into the less personal houses. So it's more global, it's more philosophical. Relationship with teachers, relationship on a cultural level, and of course, people who share the same belief systems. 10th house, our relationship with our mentors, with our teachers as well, and with the system, and how we become mentors ourselves. So it's where the relationships are hierarchical. So you are either an authority, whether you're a teacher or whether you are a student, having a relationship with your teacher. This is why, the 10th house has to do with parenting. And this is also why you're not having sexual relationships with your parents or with your teachers, because there's a necessary gap. There's a necessary distance. You're not equal to your contemporaries in the 10th house. And necessarily so. Just like a parent is not going to be an equal to their children. That's why they shouldn't have, romantic relationship with family members. There's a necessary distancing, Saturn, boundaries. 11th house is a social house, has to do with community, with friends, and with why do we have friends? So we can objectify and look at our lives from someone else's perspective. So in a way, the 11th house is where you can have close relationships that are not family related and are not romantic. So it's not emotional in that sense. And because it's not romantic and it's not familial, this is a place where you can free yourself from emotional attachments. And through the 11th house relationships, you can learn about yourself. Just like you're talking to a friend, you're going to talk to a friend about your relationship. You're going to talk to a friend about your parents. There's something that happens in the relationship with a friend that can help you solve or reflect on or gain perspective on your more intimate emotional attachments. And the 12th house is where, we understand that we are connected to everyone. So there's that unifying factor. That's why Neptune is the higher octave of Venus. So if we speak about Venus and Neptune, Venus, in the Taurus side of Venus is self-love. The Libra side of Venus is love of others. And the Neptune octave of Venus is love that is beyond personal, love for all, love that is unconditional. But at the same time, it's not intimate. So in a 12th house way, it's your ability to relate to strangers. You meet someone on a plane, you're sitting next to someone, and you start to have a conversation and you exchange ideas and have a great moment. But then once the plane lands and you go your separate way, you forget about each other. So that's the 12th house kind of connection, that we're all connected, but we don't really need to be constantly together. And we can have our separate lives, but still be connected. So it's a more spiritual, it's a more transcendental type of relationship. And that's why it's not conditional, because you can connect in the 12th house with a beggar just as much as you can connect with an artist and with a politician, with any person. You'll have something in common. Compare that to the 7th and 8th houses, especially the 8th house. The 8th house is very choice oriented. I'm going to be with you because of this and this and that, because you're deep, because you're thoughtful, because you know astrology, because you heal me. So there's a reason. In the 12th house, it doesn't matter who you are, I'll hug you. So it's not intimate, right? It's more universal. And that's the difference between the 8th and the 12th. And so in the 8th house, you want to spend time with a person. You want to spend your life with a person. You choose them because there's a magnetism, Pluto. So it's conditional. And that's why the one-on-one is stronger there. People who have a lot of 12th house planets will be more polyamorous, or Piscean planets, or Neptune, with Venus. They're more, you know, uh, they're they're not choice oriented. They can get along with anybody, and they may indeed not commit the same way that a scorpionic relationship would. And I'm going to take you right to a chart that reflects that, an example, a couple. We're going to go back to all these things, but I want to show you this chart. So this is Bill Clinton and Hillary. And, they've been married for a long time, but we know, they had major crisis. So you look at Bill's chart, and he's all Libra with this Neptune sandwiching Mars Venus, right? And so there's something very Venusian, very Libran. And then he has a Taurus moon with that. So, when you look at this chart, you see someone who wants to get along, someone who wants to pacify, who wants to round corners. But, with the Venus, Neptune, Mars in Libra, he loves everybody. He's not particular. He's going to find something positive in everyone. And so this is someone who may not have boundaries in relationships. There's something polyamorous about him. Whereas when you look at Hillary, she's a Venus in Scorpio, square Mars in Leo, square Pluto. And so she's going to be much more particular. And when she chooses someone, it has to be the one. So she has a very strong will, and she's going to be very vulnerable when it comes to trust issues. So you see, they are opposite attracts. You also see that on an elemental point of view. She's all water, a lot of water, and a Pisces moon, and a lot of Scorpio, and he has zero water. He's a lot of air and fire, and she has little air. So she gets the air from him, and he gets the water from her. But beyond the elemental distribution, that's very different, you see their temperament is very different. So if you look at their relationship, she's going to be the strong-willed in the relationship, even though he's the big Leo king and he's the president. On an intimate level, her Mars Pluto in Leo square Venus, she has strong needs and she has a strong will, and she's going to make decisions. And his Mars Neptune Venus is going to be more agreeable. Whatever you want, Hillary, whatever restaurant you want, I'm flexible. It's open. There's open energy there. So that's part of his charisma, but that's also part of his nature, to have difficulty with commitment. And that's why Mars square Venus, she's angry. She's angry because he cheated on her, and it's an ongoing thing. It's just different natures. So you see her Scorpio, how, there's on the one hand, a need for someone who's going to be the one, but how the violation of trust is very palpable. So, we can look at that. It's an interesting analysis. But I just wanted to show you that difference between the Neptunian type and the Scorpionic type. They're not looking for the same thing. But at the same time, if you look at them, they lasted many years, despite the crisis and infidelities and difficulties. They're still together. And that's quite often when you see couples that survive these crises, is because one of them has a strong Neptune. Because when you see this relationship where one of them has a strong Neptune, it means that one of them will compromise, one of them will apologize, will just not look for drama. She's more drama oriented. Why didn't you call? And why did you do that? And it's more particular, it's more intense. Whereas he's glossing over all that. Like, why do you complicate life in a Neptunian way? And so there's something about the fact that he's compromising with the Libra and the Neptune that probably allows this relationship to continue. And for her, the way for her to prevail is to do a lot of transformational work. She's going to go to therapy. She's going to talk about it. She's going to unpack the wounds. He won't, not as easily. Like he's not going to understand why people are complicating everything. We just want to love everybody. So, like we say, you look at the significators, Venus, Mars in particular, and then also Pluto, because Pluto has to do with that hunger, with that intensification of lack and the magnetism. So through Pluto and Scorpio, there's an attraction to something you need, and then a rejection when you don't need. When someone cannot offer you something that you need, you won't want to be with them. So from a Pluto point of view, there's always a question, is it enough? Am I enough? Hillary, with all her Scorpio, she's constantly asking herself, am I enough? Is my magnet strong enough to keep him? And if not, should I reject him? Or will he reject me? So there's that currency aspect, that trade. Am I getting something for what I'm giving? So Pluto represents that magnetism when you are attracted to someone who can have an impact on you. So there's fusion and soul connection. So important points in relationship astrology, we can look at the compatibility, and we can look at the different elements and Venus placement and eighth house stuff. We can do the analysis, but you cannot see the level of evolution of a person in a chart, as you may know. You don't know if they, are consensus people who will mostly strive for security. A relationship in a consensus world is marrying for security. Is that person going to be able to provide? Is that person going to be a good parent? Am I going to have a stable life? So these are the incentives. When you're in the individuated stage of consciousness, and I'm not going to get into all the definition. I assume those of you who are listening to this are familiar with levels of evolution. Otherwise, You have my books and Jeffrey Green's books and Dane Rudier's books to read about levels of evolution. But in the individuated stage, people will not just look for security in a relationship, they will look for meaning and they will look for personality. So when you're in the individuated stage, you're gonna get together because you really resonate with the personality of the person, not what their bank account has or what kind of family they come from. You're more interested in their talent, in their personality, and that's not something you can see in the chart. So astrology does not reveal the cultural conditioning. It doesn't reveal the level of evolution. It doesn't reveal how long a relationship will last. This is why you cannot do matchmaking between people who have never met, because they may have the perfect chart combination, whatever that is, but if they're on a different level of evolution, it's not going to work. They're not going to feel attracted to each other. The same way that you can have a goat whose chart is really compatible with yours, but you're not marrying that goat, even if you have an amazing synastry with them. So apply that to humans. So also, when people meet, when the universe conspires to bring two people together, our role as astrologers is to understand why and to provide information about how to make the best of this relationship, even if it's conflicted, even if you see challenges. You see the Hillary and Bill Clinton, like they're opposite attracts, but they have a life together and they made it work. So who are we as astrologers to tell them who to be with? On the other hand, you may want to guide them to better understand each other. Look, this guy, that's part of his nature is to be like that. And this gal, she's going to need that kind of thing. And so when you put everything on, you reveal that to your client, they can make their decision and say, okay, I want to try this or not. So, these are different relationship types. The opposite attracts, the karma mate, support mate, entrapment, and same soul family groups. Um, those of you, who may want to join the professional course, we are getting very deep into these different categories and analyzing charts to understand what makes a matching relationship. What are the danger of soul entrapments? What are the astrological factors that can trigger that? How do you identify karma mates, etc.? So, we're just touching the surface here. We can't unpack everything. It's a deep study. So for compatibility, beyond the actual connection of points, you do need to have a similar evolutionary level of consciousness, because that's how you're going to share similar motivations and similar value system. Now we look at the fixed signs, and the fixed signs represent the sexual force, because sexuality has to do with creation. And the Taurus side has to do with the descent of spirit into body. So sexuality, from a Taurian point of view, is sensual. It has to do with bringing the soul into flesh. And it's the pleasure principle. It's the ability to feel that your body is not a cage, but it's a temple. So the Taurian side has to do with touching ourselves, with touching people, with flavors and taste things that basically empower you on a physical level. The Leo side, to me, has to do with procreation and with the fact that through creativity coming together, you use sexuality as a means to continue your line, to have children, and to create a stronger camp for yourself. So you know, your descendant, your genes, your legacy is continuing through your creative force, which is also sexual. The Scorpio part has to do with the actual fusion between two people. So that's when, you know, you are really connecting sexually with another person and you are fusing soul to soul, eye to eye. Or, you know, the shadow side of that is obviously the abuse of another in order to gratify yourself. So the danger of Scorpio is definitely coming with a wrong intention or with negative intentions. Whereas Aquarius usually, you know, is not perceived as a sexual sign. Actually, you know, if we may do statistical work, we may see that people who have strong Aquarian emphasis, especially Venus and Mars in the 11th house or Pluto, will have the lowest libido, you know, lowest sexual impulse. But it's not because they're not sexual, it's because they don't relate to the physical aspect of sex as Taurus would. So Aquarius wants to use sexuality as a force of enlightenment, as a force of elevation and transmutation. So there's something more spiritual about the use of sexuality here. These are compatibility factors. If you want to understand how people can really work well together, uh, you know, there's a whole table of how we analyze how these factors interact to create a solid a foundation for a relationship. So let me jump to some important examples. I want to show you where was it? Yeah, I wanted to show you, you know, a chart like this one. This is Stephen Hawkins, who we know, you know, had a severe handicap. He had ALS, and his physical body atrophied. He was basically crippled physically. And we know he was very intelligent, a savant, you know, bright mind, and he prevailed against the odds. You know, people who have this disease don't usually live that long. So he had a relatively long life. And interestingly, you see a lot of Earth in his chart. We don't have a time of birth, so this is a solar chart. You see a grand trine in Earth signs, and it's so interesting that his body, you know, he felt trapped in his body. If you look at his, you know, relationship significators, he has Venus in Aquarius in the solar second house. And so again, what is his value system? It's going to be intellect, intelligence, and, you know, solving math problems. It has to do with looking into the universe, you know, very high-minded stuff. So that's how he relates to people. That's how what he values is those attributes. And then you see the South Node is in Pisces. So he's coming from a place that is more universal, that is less personal, that is more transcendental in a way. And that's why, the North Node in Virgo, one of the lesson is you need to be in your body. You need to actually incarnate in flesh. And that's quite often what happens with people who have a North Node in Virgo is that they feel like this body thing is a lot of work. They'd rather be in spirit because that's the South Node in Pisces. I'd rather be in spirit. I'd rather, be free. This free spirit is Pisces. And so the Virgo North Node is like, well, guess what? You need to do the work. You need to come into flesh. You need to heal yourself. And so his whole life was trying to be in his body. And he managed, okay, he suffered a lot, but he lasted long. The ruler of the North Node, Mercury, is again in an earth sign and it squares Mars. That's part of the struggle of, that Mars Mercury is pretty tight and it's the ruler of the North Node. So you see how he had to fight his way into this. Now, seventh house Cancer, we talked about seventh house Cancer. He needs someone who can give him a support system, who can be emotional with him. There's, aside from the South Node, there's zero water again in this chart. So he's not someone who knows how to be vulnerable. Someone Capricorn with Mars in Aries asking for help, it's tough. They're not used to ask for help. So the Cancer in the seventh house, he had to, through his illness, he had to find partners who would accept his vulnerability and something he was not comfortable about. And he married twice. He married his first wife who was with him when he got sick. And so she went through the process of marrying and having children with him, but then seeing him suffer and losing his physical autonomy. And then they divorced and he married another person, a lady whose partner at the time was the one who, I believe, if I got it right, he was the one who manufactured the device where when he lost his voice, he could have a computer that speaks for him. And let's look at that. Look at this chart, and that's his first wife. So she's herself an Aries and an Aquarius South Node, and her Mars in Cancer. That Mars squares Neptune. So you see a great deal of sacrifice and service with that Mars-Neptune square. But importantly, look at her Venus. Her Venus is in Pisces. And what does she value? She's able to accept people as they are. Venus in Pisces is not particular. They're not picky. They're not selective. They get along with people. And so the opposition to Chiron in Virgo shows that there's definitely something medical associated with this relationship. But interestingly, look at the degree of Venus. It's right on his South Node. So they knew each other and she already took care of him. So that Venus Chiron opposition is right on his nodes. Oops. And there's more to it. But his second wife, is a Leo with an Aries moon conjunct Jupiter. So that's, and Mars in Aries. So it's like that fireball. And look at, she's all red hair and, where does it move so fast? So you see that she has the South Node in Virgo opposite his. And as a Leo, Aries moon with South Node in Virgo, she's in charge. She's going to take care of him. She's going to fix it. So there's the fixing quality of the Virgo Leo give me a project. You know, you're going to be my project. But the thing is, as much as, you know, the Leo in her was also very enamored by the fact that he was this big personality and very famous scientist, but she started to compete with him. You know, there were stories that she got abusive, and that she got angry. So you see, her Venus, she is the one to take charge. She's the one to get him the voice device. She's the one to take care of his need. But then she was resentful that she had to take, you know, she had to be, quote unquote, his servant. You know, a lady with Mars in Leo lives with that conflict where, on the one hand, she wants a strong man, but she doesn't want to be controlled by that man. And she's fighting, you know, there's a fight within herself of what will be the ideal partner. But her Venus is on his north node. So, first wife, Venus on his south node, second wife, Venus on his north node. Is there something karmic here, you think? So, you know, there's a lot more to explore, but that's, to me, what's important to bring in this presentation is to understand how deep, how multi-layered relationships are, but also how astrology can be such a powerful tool, to understand relationships and to help people, you know, help people have healthier relationship, understand themselves. You know, if young Bill and young Hillary or young Stephen Hawkins and his wives were coming to you for advice, you would be able to give so much guidance and perhaps help them resolve some of the conflicts much earlier on in the game. That's the beauty of astrology. So, thank you, everyone. Do we have time for questions? I don't know if people are live here. And again, I invite you to go to my website, whether you want a consultation, whether you're interested in studies. Um, I'd be happy to. Okay, no question. Good night, everyone.